everyone, and welcome. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Boiling Point, Policy Solutions for South Asia's Heat Stress Series. This event is hosted by the Center for a Smart Future and Colombo Urban Lab. The Center for a Smart Future is a Colombo-based public policy think tank that brings together researchers, advisors, and partners from all around the world. Within CSF, the Urbanization and Cities theme is led by Colombo Urban Lab, or CUL. At CUL, we focus on building equitable and sustainable cities in Sri Lanka. Our work is grounded in research and is driven by real lived experiences of people in our cities. Today, we are excited to share insights from our recent policy brief titled Heat Stress in Colombo, Understanding Impacts and Planning for the Future. This research explores how rising heat is affecting outdoor workers in Colombo and what needs to change in how we plan and respond. We are also thrilled to widen this conversation beyond Colombo and look at the bigger picture of heat stress around South Asia. We are delighted to be joined by Amita Arudpragasam, Policy Analyst, and Muhamad Toheed, Executive Director of the Karachi Urban Lab. Thank you both for joining us and being with us today. Amita Arudpragasam is a multidisciplinary researcher and public policy analyst based in Colombo. She focuses on the intersections of economics, politics, gender, and conflict. She is currently producing a documentary and writing a series of articles focused on economic development and climate emergency in war-impacted regions of Sri Lanka. Muhamad Toheed is an urban planner and geographer serving as the co-director at Karachi Urban Lab. With experience in sustainable urban development, he drives innovative solutions for Karachi's complex urban challenges. We are very grateful to have you both join us today. And from Colombo Urban Lab, we have Iromi Perera and Meghal Perera. Iromi is the founder and director of Colombo Urban Lab and works on economic justice, post-war urban development, and spatial justice in Sri Lanka. Her research looks at the lived experiences of community affected by Sri Lanka's poly crisis, large-scale infrastructure projects, development finance, and social protection. Meghal Perera is an interdisciplinary researcher with interest in infrastructure, housing, and urban ecologies. She's currently working as a research associate here at Colombo Urban Lab. To start us off, I will hand the mantle over to Iromi. Iromi, do you want to get us started?
Great. Thank you so much, Pilmi, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And we're really kind of excited to have Amita and Muhammad with us today. So with cities becoming hotter every year, cities in Sri Lanka are no exception. And while our cities have not reached the temperatures of other South Asian cities, where they exceed 40 degrees Celsius during their summer periods, there's so much that we need to do to prepare Sri Lanka for becoming hotter as time goes. And whilst heat stress is experienced by all of those in the city, and I mean, right across the country, the impacts are unequal. It is and it will be felt and experienced greater by outdoor workers and informal workers, as well as those living in low-income settlements and areas. As Sri Lanka doesn't have, say, summer and winter periods, actually what we experience are more hot days through the year, coupled with monsoon and flooding in between, which means that people are dealing with more days of extreme weather through the year. We've also been researching on the impacts of Sri Lanka's poly crisis since 2020 and its impact on working class communities in Colombo, as well as the gendered impacts. And what we've seen is that we can't isolate issues and say that this is a climate issue and this needs a climate response. There's an energy issue and it needs a different response. There's a tax issue, there's a nutrition issue, and so on. These issues and crises are all interlinked and they can happen simultaneously, repeatedly. So whatever pathways we talk about, even for heat stress, we need to think about all these different variables and factors and how it impacts people in more ways than one. So today we are really pleased to host this webinar on heat stress in South Asia, and we hope to keep continuing this conversation on what we can learn from each other, but also how we can act together. So we'll start with a presentation by us at Colombo Urban Lab, and then hand over to Amita, who will share her work from North Sri Lanka, and then Muhammad from Karachi Urban Lab where they have been pioneering the work in the region on heat stress. And they have inspired a lot of the work that we do at Colombo Urban Lab. So we're really glad that they could join us today. And after the presentations, we will open for a discussion and questions. So on that note, I'd like to hand over to Meghal to kick us off.
Thanks, Iromi. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. So I think just to kick us off, I think I'm just going to present a bit of the research that we've done, which was a series of interviews with outdoor workers over the course of last year and early this year. And I think before I get into actually the meat of it, I just want to highlight that one of the key observations from this the research was really thinking about heat as a phenomenon and how people perceive and understand heat. Because what we've noticed, and one of the challenges in fieldwork really was that if it's not hot, people don't really forget about heat and its impacts, and they're not really interested in talking about it. But the second thing is also that outdoor workers have acclimatized to a certain level of heat as part of their day-to-day lives. So I think it's a question of also what does urban heat an increasing heat really mean when it's taken for granted in our cities as a norm. And I think that it means that the harms of heat become a bit more insidious. And I also think that it means that we don't take as much preemptive action because the problem is always not as serious, and there's a bit of a gap between the problem and people maybe perceiving the problem. So maybe the next slide, Yumi. So just a few of the impacts of heat that we found in outdoor workers. This is apart from obviously the considerable thermal discomfort that they go through and the considerable mental stress that comes from heat. We also found that there was worsening certain health ailments. So in particular, high propensity for skin rashes, headaches, dizziness. And while this population already has quite a high level of NCDs, we found that a lot of people said that their symptoms had worsened during times of heat. So higher pressure, for example, their heart issues had also worsened. The other thing that we found was obviously that heat and sun in particular also affect goods and produce. They result in a more rapid perishing of produce and a more rapid spoilage, which means that a lot of times produce is wasted, or considerable effort has to be put into making sure that produce is still viable or still can be sold. But the third thing we also found was that for some people, especially like retail vendors, heat was actually seen as an opportunity. These periods of heat were a chance for them to make a windfall, essentially, especially if you were, say, an ice cream vendor or a tambili vendor. That would be the most obvious example. But in other cases, we also saw retailers pivoting to different types of drinks, selling cool drinks to maximize this brief period of heat. And we saw various coping strategies that people adopted during periods of heat. Though I think the most obvious being hydration and cooling, where people were obviously drinking a lot of water. So most of our respondents would talk about bringing these big bottles, empty mega bottles, and refilling it multiple times a day. So this was their drinking water. It's the water they use to wash their hands. It's the water they use to wet the pavement. To cool themselves down. It's the water they use to also sometimes wet the produce to keep it fresh, especially in the case of something like leafy greens. So hydration was obviously a very popular strategy. What everyone really told us was that things like king coconut or other hydrating drinks that are often recommended during these periods of heat were just completely unaffordable, so they were unable to use that. For other workers, especially gig workers, who are exposed to the sun almost throughout the day, protective clothing played a really important role. So things like gloves, socks, jackets, hats, caps, basically making sure that they were completely covered to protect themselves from skin rashes. Next slide, please. So another strategy that was used to tackle heat is avoidance. And in this case, it's people really cutting down their working hours, going home earlier to avoid the most intense periods of heat. This is also not an option for everyone. Not everybody can do this. So for example, we found that people who were able to leave early were usually selling some kind of produce that people would be anyway buying in the morning, something like fish or a very perishable item like leafy greens. So this really was not an option for a lot of outdoor workers. In some cases, we also saw outdoor workers really, like such as the abans cleaners or street cleaners, would prioritize doing the hardest part of their job early in the day, so that would minimize their exposure to heat during the hottest times. The other thing that people do is obviously seek shade and shelter, often positioning their temporary stall under a tree for shade. People reportedly told us that if the tree was cut down or if the tree was fell down, for instance, they would actually move because shade was such an important part of why they did not feel hot. They also resorted to like finding these temporary shelters. So here you can see in the images people resting on a roundabout during the middle of the day, but also people sitting up under a bus stand to sell produce. So these are these sort of man-made infrastructures as well. The shadow of a building, bus stands were also quite important means of seeking shelter from the heat. Next slide. There's also other strategies that people do in terms of creating shade for themselves. So here you can see this Uber driver has rigged up this contraption bought online, again at his own expense, to protect himself from the heat. These kind of like temporary creation of shade is quite important. On the other side, we see sometimes some produce that is being covered because it will spoil if not. And what we noticed here is also that very frequently, even this is not just limited to outdoor workers, but even kind of normal retail shops would hang a cloth or some kind of covering to protect their goods, especially at times of the day where the sun was directly was going. Next slide. Another common thing, especially for informal workers who are kind of situated, maybe selling from the ground or in a more temporary vending situation, was umbrellas. And I think what is important about this is that there's like a trade-off to be made between protecting yourself from heat and also attracting attention and visibility. And what we found was that it's not everybody who has this kind of security and kind of safety from eviction to be able to put up something like an umbrella that draws attention, that indicates that they are here for a longer time. So these are also some of the tensions that come into play when thinking about informality and responses to heat in light of that. Next slide. So just to situate this also in a context of public infrastructure in Colombo, I think it's important to note that there's been a large-scale removal of public taps in Colombo over the last few years as part of a project to reduce non-revenue water in Colombo. And this has meant that in many public parks, in many urban settlements, public taps have been removed and private meters have been incentivized. And this has had an impact on workers in the city and their ability to access water. The other thing is also that public toilets have a fee attached to them. So people have to pay an amount to access public toilets. Now, this amount is small. Again, it's 30 to 40 rupees. But this includes if they want to use the toilet to wash their hands. And the other thing is that if you're a daily worker, it really adds up because you're using it every day. Secondly, if you're, say, an Uber driver or another gig worker, you will also have to pay parking in addition. So even though it's a small amount, it really adds up over a period of time. And we see that for women in particular, when they don't have public toilets or when the cost of public toilets maybe is not is taken into consideration, when they have concerns over like the safety or the cleanliness of public toilets, this becomes a real problem because especially in the absence of public toilets, what women end up doing is having to rely on, again, maybe a neighbor. Frequently, we found that women actually return home to use the toilet. And as a result, they spend on the transport costs. They have a loss of income incurred because they have to stop their business while they use the washroom. And this also often results in women just not drinking water so that they don't need to use the toilet as regularly. And I think that what we've seen in as a result, when we look at the kind of erosion of public infrastructure in Colombo, is that we see a constellation of institutions that are also serving the needs of informal workers. So we see gig workers using supermarket toilets. We've seen mobile vendors talking about how they take water from mosques and temples. A key cutter in a stand might use a government office next door. And social networks really play an important role in this provisioning and making sure that people have access to this infrastructure. And I think that it's something that we really need to recognize, how people take care of each other and how these networks of care also play a role in mitigating heat stress. So I'll stop there and Iromi can talk about the solutions.
Thanks, Meghal. And Piyumi, if you could go to the next slide. So basically, these are some preliminary recommendations that we have based on our work in the past year. And if anyone is interested, we have detailed them in our research brief, and we would be happy to share the link on the chat later. Next slide. So basically, investing in green lungs in Colombo will play a crucial part in how we cope with heat stress in the future. Neighborhoods, what we've seen is that neighborhoods with even small parks and large trees cope better than areas that have no green cover. And data shows that we have actually been losing more and more of our wetlands and green cover because of development, and it's critical that we don't lose any more sort of green space in the city. When it comes to any kind of data-driven planning, whether it's a heat action plan or development planning or infrastructure planning or even climate risk assessments, all of these must be data-driven. We don't currently see any kind of coherent plans for the city by any of the state authorities. And when we say they must be data-driven, it is not only climate data that is taken into account, but also socioeconomic data and information that can be disaggregated by age and gender so that we can see differentiated impacts that can be assessed and targeted measures planned for. With regard to institutional responsibility, what we see is that currently it lacks a clear institutional responsibility and a long-term response. And Ministry of Health is now sort of the face of information and advisories on heat stress. And because of this, it really remains sort of ad hoc, more reactive, and we hear of advisories only during months of extreme heat. And there's little to no information available about how Colombo and the country at large plans to cope with increase in temperatures. So what we really need is a more forward planning, multi-sectoral, coherent response to climate change and heat stress. And it must have the participation of various ministries and departments beyond health. So it must include education, transport, environment, women and children, food security, to name a few. And as Meghal mentioned about the importance of public infrastructure, we really need more investment in critical infrastructures like taps, bathrooms, benches with shade, places for people to rest. And not only will this enable outdoor workers to perform their work, but these are infrastructures that will benefit the city at large, because it is not only outdoor workers who are impacted by heat stress. Next slide. And just to add that there's no point in just investing in public infrastructure if this infrastructure does not care or is not meaningfully maintained. So, for example, bathrooms, there's no point in giving bathrooms if they're not safe, if they're not clean, if they're not disinfected every day, if there's no clean running water and soap to wash hands. And similarly, we've also seen in Colombo that there is a bend towards hostile architecture where there are, things like benches and seating, for example, that is provided for the public, but they're hostile because, nobody can, for example, the one in this picture, nobody can really rest. You can't lie down and rest if they need to during periods of heat stress. So when we say invest in public infrastructure, it has to be public infrastructure that is really meaningful and can be used. Next slide. And finally, just to kind of talk about the financing side of things, we do need to see a lot more access to adaptation finance, particularly for outdoor workers, because currently they are the ones who are buying their own protective gear protective material for goods and produce. And these are not long-lasting measures and need to be replaced time and time again. And without pushing them further into debt, we need to see more access to finance that will enable them to conduct their livelihoods with dignity. There's a role here also for private companies and even the platform companies to step in and give the riders and delivery workers, for example, more protective gear, provide more sort of refreshing and sort of resting points so that all of this does not lie only with the state and municipal councils. We really need to also see a shift towards better climate budgeting, where, I mean, to put it simply, where decision makers have to ensure that every rupee that is spent, whether it's a municipal budget or any other budget, has a climate consideration. Financing mechanisms is really key for Sri Lanka and for Colombo in particular, and lack of funding in cities for climate mitigation and adaptation remains an issue globally. And currently in Sri Lanka, as many of you know, public financing is already under so much stress because we are still recovering from our polycrisis, and we see sectors such as health and education being quite still inadequately funded. So there are lots of different types of mechanisms that we see other countries and other cities using. But of course, then the way that we need to use it will be different based on Colombo's or different cities' needs. So we would have to kind of understand and see what would make more sense for us. And these could range from parametric insurance to even specific mechanisms like heat credits, heat funds, and heat bonds. And just to end to say that, like, to reiterate what I said at the beginning, is to say that we can't kind of look at impact of climate change and heat alone. And we need to see how they all connect with other issues like energy, time poverty, gendered impacts, nutrition, and to kind of see this as a whole host of interlinked issues that need to be tackled in a fairly interdisciplinary, multi-sectoral way. On that, I will hand it over back to Puni.
Thanks, Iromi. I think we've gotten a good head start on understanding what heat stress is like currently in Colombo, based on the research we've done. I'll hand over the mantle to Amita to speak about what she has noticed in the North and East and how the workers there are handling heat stress over there.
Sure, just checking if I'm audible.
Yeah, you are.
Okay, and if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, so as Pumi mentioned, the subject area, the area of my research is the North and the Northwestern provinces, actually. These are considered climate hotspots within Sri Lanka. And within these provinces, you see that Jaffna, Puttlam, Manna, and Kilinochchi are especially vulnerable. Last year, there were media reports that at least 7 people had died of extreme heat in the northern province. And I'll come back to this later, hopefully. But the way we statistically kind of analyze or understand heat-related deaths is incomplete and kind of not very coherent at the moment. So it's hard to really ascertain what's related, a death that's related to heat and one that's caused by some other set of reasons. The North and the Northwest, as many of you already know, are areas that are still really recovering from conflict, mass displacement. They face persistent human rights abuses, ethnic discrimination, and state violence. So when Iromi mentioned polycrisis before, this is really an epitome of the polycrisis. Alongside facing the climate crisis and being a hotspot for the climate crisis, there are language barriers that still exist between the central government and the provinces and different government departments. The regions are generally poor, the districts I've mentioned, and lacking in resources. And there's depleted community activism as political actors are overwhelmed with a number of other crises. So there's very little representation of these issues in the public domain. These regions are affected by extreme heat. I'll get to that shortly, but I do want to mention also that they face several other issues as well: rising sea levels, soil salinization, floods, droughts, coastal erosion as well. And that's something that interacts with the impacts of heat. And I will get to that later. So the northwestern provinces are really epitomes of the polycrisis. And each of these crises tend to kind of make solving one of them more complicated, or managing one of them more complicated, because they amplify each other. So extreme heat tends to impact different workers differently, obviously. On the left-hand side, I think, for everybody, you'll see an ornamental fisherman. Mr. Sudat, he catches ornamental fish for a living, and they're one of the first kind of professions to really be aware of rising sea temperatures. When marine temperatures rise, what happens is a phenomenon called coral bleaching, and that is when coral turns white, and the fish around who depend on those reefs sort of start to also kind of reduce in number. So that was telling me that he noticed less butterfly fish, and that's really like a signal for poor reef health. That's one example. Another is a cattle farmer in Northern Sri Lanka, pictured on the right, who suffered livestock losses due to extreme heat in 2024, and alongside that, cold shock in 2022. So extreme heat impacts different workers differently, but often when you go and talk to these individuals, they're not using the words coral bleaching or attributing things directly. So it's more a perception, and it's about asking also the right questions. But my research, which I published in April 2025, 3 months ago, is more focused on women, really, and how women are experiencing heat. And I should add, before I proceed further, that it's not a systemic study. It's a kind of, I use a few different individuals as case studies to to investigate how heat is experienced by these communities and particular industries. So a lot more research is really required, and very little exists right now in the North. One thing that was common to most of these workers, or one thing that is actually a fact, is that women tend to be more physiologically vulnerable to extreme heat. And so when I interviewed a director at the Jaffna Teaching Hospital, he said women were less likely to seek hospital care than men when they had symptoms of heat-related illnesses. And because they have caregiving duties at home, they typically arrive for treatment only at a much more advanced stage of an illness than a man. And that really kind of speaks to the dual burden that's faced by women, which I'll get to shortly as well. So the dual burden on women is basically when women have to perform caregiving duties at home, but at the same time they're expected to go and participate in formal employment when they're not paid for the caregiving duties that they perform at home. So when women experience extreme heat, a recent study by the Atlantic Council's Climate Resilience Center found that it actually increases the time that women work to perform the same amount of paid and unpaid work. And because caring for family members struck by heat-related illness is also considered a woman's duty, heat imposes this sort of dual burden on women. It reduces the time that they have for leisure activities and to perform other types of paid work or to take care of themselves. So this research that I produced in April 2025, so 3 months ago, looks at 4 different industries and the women who are working within them. Karavadu, dried fish sellers, seaweed farmers, saltern workers, and cashew nut producers. So the two women pictured here, they've been in the dried fish industry for over 3 decades. And about 15 years ago, they were saying that there were about 200 to 300 women in their business, but now there are much fewer. Part of the reason for this is bottom trawling. So again, this speaks to our inability to really isolate impacts and attribute them solely to one phenomenon. But the second largest reason this woman cited was increased. She described the heat that she was experiencing as unbearable. She said it hits our body and it rises from the sand. And she says sometimes we can't even stay in our houses. So these two ladies, they have experienced, they described a kind of a cartel, which is like translates literally as a fever. And she says, they said that there are entire homes in their villages which feel feverish or experience a cartel during moments or periods of extreme heat. But at the same time, they're suspicious of government hospitals because of the economic crisis, the medical imports, out-migration of doctors. So, so that is a little bit about how the Karavada fisher women are impacted. Cashew nut producers, because they're indoor workers, have a whole set of different considerations. The women here are wearing, gloves, three layers of gloves, and they seal their windows and their doors so that the coastal air doesn't really impact the texture of their cashew, and so that they can keep certification. But as a result, similar to what Meghal was describing before, some women are just unable to work indoors and they're unable to work under these extreme heat conditions. And so they've switched jobs. Some have experienced heat rashes on their hands. And during the year, I think perhaps this is only just beginning, and we don't really fully understand the scale of this. But last year, temperatures were apparently so high that women had to take a few days off as well. So we obviously that strikes the managers and employers a little different because their profits are then being affected as well. All the women, similar to the Karavada fishers, talked about their caregiving duties at home. And that again speaks to the kind of the importance or significance of the dual burden on women. The third industry is seaweed producers. So here the women you can see the seaweed that they're producing. It's very vulnerable to extreme heat, so it can be impacted by a disease called epiphytism. And the women here have long lines on which they hang their seaweed, and these are suspended by plastic bottles in the ocean. They have little enclosures as well, and seaweed aquaculture is actually promoted as a great industry for women's empowerment because it can be done in shallow water. As you can see, these women are wading through the water right now to get to their enclosures. But because of extreme heat, you see the women having to create enclosures further and further out, which means that some women are unable to join if they can't swim. That means women are being driven out of that business. Quickly move on to saltern workers. Here you can see again cleaning salt pans and collecting and transporting salt. When I asked the manager about the health impacts faced by these workers, he was not aware of any. But the women who work here told me that they experience exhaustion, lightheadedness, heat rash, blurriness of vision. And even though you can see them out there. Sorry, it's kind of loud. But you can see them wearing boots, you can see them wearing scarves and fully covered to protect themselves also from the salt crystals, which are very hot. this kind of really worsens their experience. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna kind of skip through this, but how we understand heat to impact women and men isn't fully understood, and that's really largely because of a kind of like a history in which heat is studied and researched. Units like the CLO, which are units used to study thermal resistance, are kind of based on, they're studied using the bodies of men. So there's a lot of the kind of history of research that we have that looks at heat, is very dismissive of how women may be experiencing heat differently. I guess to conclude, I'd like to kind of echo what Iromi mentioned, that solutions have to be comprehensive and multi-sectoral. They have to involve the state, the employees and individuals. As you can see, different industries are really impacted very differently. But extreme heat really impacts industries and impacts female labor force participation, in which the Northern Province is faring much worse than the rest of the country. And employers do need to step up and look at the particularities of their industry, how individuals in their particular businesses are being impacted, in order to propose a recommendation for kind of overcoming extreme heat. I believe I don't want to go over time, Iromi, so I think I'll end my presentation there.
Thank you so much, Amita. Thank you for doing such a comprehensive presentation showing how the interconnected nature of the poly crisis is affecting the women workers and workers in the North and Northwest. I think there's a lot of similarities between what we found in terms of the gendered impacts that it has. And it's really interesting to see how heat affects different people differently in different parts of the country. Thank you so much for that. And we'll move on to Muhamad Toheed, who is joining us from Karachi. Muhamad, are you able to share your screen?
Yeah, if you could just
Yes.
okay, that's good.
While this is being set up, I invite all of the participants to send in any questions that you might have for the panelists in the chat, and we can bring them up during the Q&A.
Okay. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Muhamad Toheed, and I'm an urban planner and co-director at the Karachi Urban Lab. Today, I'll be sharing insights from our work on how people in cities like Karachi are living and working under intensifying heat stress due to the climate change. And our core argument is what does heat means in everyday life and to people, and how can we plan better in response? So, So this work is part of one of our project we just completed. It was a 2.5 year intensive study we have done in Karachi, namely Cool Infrastructure Project, which looks at how people across the cities in the global south manage the extreme heat, especially in off-grid or the underserved areas, less privileged areas. And our focus is not only on formal system like air conditioning or the early warning system, but also on everyday life, the informal practices of adaptation within the communities. This include the bodily routines of the people, daily chores, built environment, and the cultural ways of coping with heat. So Now, one key challenge is a lack of the grounded evidence and the data. And not only in Karachi, across Pakistan, the data about the heat, data about the weather change, data about the climate change is really challenging to get some good sort of data set. So most climate risk assessment don't capture how vulnerabilities intersect with the gender, occupation, and the social class. For example, a heat wave may be a statistical event for the government bodies and the institution, but for a woman cooking in a iron roof or the tin roof in formal settlement, it's a daily struggle. And our question is that what does thermal comfort mean in such context, and how this experience inform the climate policy and urban design?
Excuse me, Mohammed, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We are not able to see you change the slides at the moment. Have you been changing them so far?
Yeah. On my screen, it's showing.
We are not able to. We are only able to see the PowerPoint app.
Oh, I'm so sorry, but I don't know why it's happening because at my end, the slides is changing. So it's okay if could I stop share and share it again? Might it works?
Yes, please. Could we give it a try?
Okay. Now can you see my screen?
Yes, we are on the learning curve slide, right?
Okay, now it's on the first slide. Okay, now the slide are changing.
No, we can't see the slides changing.
Because at my end the slide are going to change. Yeah. Okay. Would you like to share from your end
Yes, we are.
my PPT?
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Thank you so much, everyone, for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. I think we are good to go, Muhammad.
Okay. So if we talk about the learning curve, one of the key challenge is the lack of the grounded evidence and data, as I earlier mentioned that, and most the climate assessment don't capture how vulnerabilities intersect with gender, occupation, and the social class. For example, a family who is living in a tin roof in formal settlements. So the heat and the dealing with heat is a kind of daily struggle for them. And our core question is that what does thermal comfort mean for them, those cannot afford to neutralize the impact of the heat, and how this experience come up with the climate change policy across the city and the urban design. Next slide, please. Okay, if I talk about our recent work in Karachi, we examined that the heat through the three lenses. First, how the heat governance work who is responsible, and the how decisions are made. The second, what's the rhythm of everyday life are affected, like the sleeping pattern, the food, and the mobility. And the third is that how people cope with the heat, what cultural and bodily practices they use. We do this using interdisciplinary tool from anthropology, urban planning, and physiology and design. Next. Okay, so heat is not static. It shifts across the time of the day, across the space. Like people feel that the one room is a little bit cooler as compared to the others, and they prefer to stay most of the daytime over there. Likewise, the shaded space versus the unshaded areas, and across the body. Vulnerability is not uniform at all. So we must consider the urban topographies, how built environment amplify or mitigate the heat, and the differentiated ways people are affected. Next. So this is really interesting in our language Urdu. The people call that the garmi to hamesha se hai, nayi cheez nahi. And they said it's always hot. It's not a new phenomena, new thing. Okay, but when we jump into the communities and this discourse come up, like 98% of the people, those belongs to the low income group, comes with the same response. So we challenge this assumption in a way that, yeah, the heat is not new, but the intensity, the duration, and the timing have intense and change over the time. And crucially, the people's ability to adopt has been constrained by inequality, urban sprawl, and the governance gap. Next. So we draw on some of the studies. We have seen that the Indian Met Department to show the different kind of trend, increasing heat-related deaths have risen significantly over the last 20 years. That's really worrying. In a way, many of these deaths are underreported and not classified as heat related. And the same trend we can see in Karachi, Lahore, and the major cities of Pakistan. So the most of the that are underreported and not classified as heat related. If I can exemplify that, the heat wave that was happened in 2015, and according to the government record, only 1,200 people were died at the time. But unofficially, the first responders told us that more than 6,000 people were died at that time, but just because of the underreporting and some of the deaths are not classified in the domain of the heat. So that number comes a very less in a way that you can make a compare between the 1,200 and 6,000 even. So heat is now a major public health risk for the cities like Karachi. Next. So if we have to look the climate change and Pakistan, according to the Climate Risk Index 2025, Pakistan is on the top of the list just because of the flood that happened in 2022. Although Pakistan was among the ranked of top 10 most vulnerable countries during the past year, but now the vulnerability is more higher. And it's very clear that by 2050, the temperatures in the parts of the country could be rises by nearly 3 degrees Celsius, with the heat wave days increasing in the fivefold. Next. So if we have to look the heat wave advisory and during the last 60 days, so last year, the Pakistan Meteorological Department issued 5 heat wave alerts in just 2 months. Some say this may be the longest sustained heat event since recorded began in 1901. So our planning, infrastructure, and health system remain reactive and fragmented. Next. So, yeah, this table is really interesting and from the International Labour Organization. And this talk about the previous trend and the projection. So, how heat stress impact already impacted and will impact on the labor productivity across South Asia, and how it's projected and would be worsened in 2030. So, if just focus on Pakistan back in 1950, we were losing about 4.2% of the total working hour to heat stress. By 2030, it will increase up to the 5.5%. So, it means 4.6 million of the full-time jobs kind of losing over. These hard hitting sectors, you can see that the agriculture, construction, and the manufacturing, this is not just a climate issue, it's an economic crisis as well. Million of workers, especially if we talk about the informal workers, are already struggling with lost income due to the extreme heat. So these projections call for the urgent policy changes, heat safe workplace, access to water, and specifically to revise the labor codes. Next. So if we have to look the heat experience in South Asia, if I talk about Karachi, the humid heat wave complicate the heat problem. In high humidity, generally the sweat does not evaporate, so the body can't cool itself. And if we talk about a little bit wet bulb temperature, so that really accurately measured this danger. While previously we thought that the 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb was the human threshold. New studies shows that the 31 degrees Celsius can be lethal. So the day-to-day changes in the standard and the ground situation, and specifically for the vulnerable population like older people and the people with the chronic disease are highly in danger zone. And if I talk about Karachi, so we regularly crosses this threshold. Next. So in Karachi, the people often endure the chronic exposure to high heat and humidity. Even if not officially called a heat wave, that sustained heat, especially at night, prevents the recovery. Many homes are poorly ventilated, and the indoor temperature can feel even hotter than outside. So this blur the line between the environment and the perception. Next. So one of the study we have done that some of the work I want to share by KUL we have done with the 60 years of the data of the MAD department, and with the working of the data, we revealed that the daytime temperature increased up to 1.6 degrees Celsius during the last 60 years, the average daytime temperature. But the alarming aspect is that the nighttime temperature increased up to 2.4 degrees Celsius. Generally, it's a perception in Karachi as a coastal city, the nights are cooler than the days. But now we are not in that situation. Now the nights are more warmer as compared to the days. So it's a kind of urban heat island impact directly the Karachiites, a city of over 30 million people, are facing. Next. So these findings resonate that the changes that have been made over the 60 years, and we work with the satellite data as well to check out that the green cover, as Iromi talk about the green cover of Sri Lanka. So I wanted to share that during the last 20 years, the satellite data shows that the Karachi green cover decreased up to 40%. And it's really alarming that you can see in Karachi everywhere in a satellite view, everywhere the buildings or the concrete you can find out. Only the green pockets you can see on the satellite map, those are really the graveyard. The graveyard, the only places where you can find the green cover or the trees like that. Next. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we have done within this project, we have done some of the commercial surveys, some of the household surveys. So today I'll talk about the commercial surveys. Those were 2,350 surveys we have done with the outdoor worker. Those really work with the exposure of the sun. And our focus was on the occupation type and their routines and their workplace, the materiality, and we also focus that their hydration practices, they have some sort of shades or not, their work days. Yeah, next. So our focus was in a way that the three layers. Very first, we talk about the adaptation, and the second, the negative impact, and the third, unclear. Next. So this slide tells us how both number of work days as well as the thermal, the influence of the thermal discomfort. On the left side, we can see a clear trend as the number of work days are increased. So likely those people are reporting that the heat is impacting them more than before. If because our question was that, okay, how could you compare that like this month of June and the last year month of June? How would you feel the difference? And usually the labor class work on the 6 days a week. Generally, here in Pakistan, the Friday could be considered as their holiday. So they report that they cannot work on the 7 days or the 6 days or even 5 days just because of the heat. So this is the phenomena. On the right side, they talk about how could they get a break as a day in a week or as 1 hour or 2 hour break. So this data strongly support the case of introducing the structure break and the workload management as the key adaptation strategies in informal and outdoor work settings. Next. So if we talk about the negative impact, this slide highlight how both physical exertion and the access to water shape and how people experience heat at work. You can see that the among workers who had no access to water, nearly uh, half feel that the heat had impacted them more than the last year. Compare that with only a few that said those have the drinking water availability. Because sometime in Karachi, the water scarcity is more high as compared to the previous years, as well as the pipeline supply almost disconnected during the hot summer days. And most strikingly, when we look at the physical demand of the job, those in high exertion role, the construction worker, loaders, and mechanics, those reported that the heat effect more than that before. So these are small changes. Likewise, if we suggest the basic protection, provide water to them, and workload schedule and the shift in the labor laws, these are the small changes that can have a big impact on the health and the productivity and the safety of the labor. Next. So if we conclude in a way, the finding that comes from our commercial surveys using these three categories. So in adaptation, we saw that the access to water and the ability to take break help worker to manage the heat better. And in term of in the heading of the negative impact, more work days, physically demanding labor, and no break were strongly associated with the increased thermal discomfort. And the third one, variable, like working indoor versus outdoor, and the proximity to heat sources, where responses were mixed. Some indoor space were just as hot as outdoor one due to the poor ventilation and the trapped heat. So the takeaway is that not all the working conditions are equal when it's come to the heat, where how and for how long people work determine their risk and inform where intervention are more urgently needed. Next. So as I mentioned that the Karachi, 62% of the Karachi lives in informal settlement, and these neighborhood are face a multiple burden like poor housing, lack of water and electricity, different kind of disease, and the mental stress specifically. So climate change adds to this, and heat here is not just about the temperature; it's about the inequality. Next. Yeah. Thank you, all of you. To end, I want to emphasize our response to the heat must be rooted the people life in reality. We need data, yes, but we also need the stories, the routine, how the people are living, the voices from the ground. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Muhammad, for your presentation. And I think contextualizing this situation in Karachi for us was really useful because it's a city that's a bit unfamiliar to us, but also a city that Colombo can learn a lot from for sure. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. We request the participants if you can hang around for maybe 20 more minutes for our Q&A. But there will be a recording of this session going up on YouTube as well once the discussion is over. Maybe we can start off a question that's general to both of the panelists that we have today. I remember Amita mentioning that the impact that heat has on gender and gender norms is something that has been unexplored for so far. So I was just curious as to what other areas of research and what research gaps persist in terms of heat, and what future directions heat-related research can go towards, especially contextualized in South Asian region. And it's an open question for Iromi and Meghal as well, of course.
So I guess on gender, I'll take this, I guess, to start. But on gender norms, what was interesting to me was that it wasn't, I guess this is a question that I also had, or that I discussed with my editors when I was publishing this piece about whether women are disproportionately impacted by heat, right? There are certain gender norms that dictate whether a woman or a man goes into a particular industry. So there are fewer women in the construction industry, fewer women in the deep sea than in shallow waters, and various industries have various gender norms attached to them, as to begin with. And then, when we think about how gender norms impact heat, obviously some of these industries are more exposed to extreme heat than I think other industries. So outdoor workers, as we've already mentioned, are far more impacted by extreme heat. One thing that I was coming across was that, like all the recent, or a majority, I think, of the recent deaths that happened in the northern province were all men. And many of the cases had instances of drinking attached to them. And drinking is an activity that is more prevalent amongst men than women in the north. It also causes dehydration, right? So that's another example of how gender norms can lead to more vulnerability for men. So I think even though, like, as a researcher, I'm always, and as a feminist, I'm always looking for ways that women might be impacted. My research was inconclusive, and I had to like resist rushing to the kind of very easy solution that, yeah, women are disproportionately impacted by heat, because gender norms obviously impact both genders or all genders, and a lot more research is really required to kind of think through how industry exposure might impact different genders, how norms within an industry might impact genders as well. And there were I think, a lot of kind of examples of this. So at the health ministry, an individual I spoke to talked about how women are like happier to wear hats with wide brims, and men may actually think of this as effeminate and avoid wearing this, and then expose themselves to extreme heat, putting themselves at danger. So I think, there's a lot more research that needs to be done to see how gender norms impact our exposure to extreme heat.
Maybe Muhammad, do you want to share any?
Yeah. Thank you so much. We also looked the gender impact of heat in our context. So in context of Pakistan, there is no specific policy that talks about the gender aspect of the heat, and no doubt that the heat disproportionate impact on the gender, specifically the women, in case of Pakistan. So usually in our social context, 65% of the female are supposed to live at home, and only 35% are supposed to go outside for the jobs and others. But if I talk specifically, the female, those supposed to live at home, the home sizes are very small. There is no specific ventilation, and the female are supposed to do the kitchen chores like cooking and as well. And whenever we work in the different communities where the kitchen is very small, there is no ventilation, and the heat add on from the cooking time. So there is no concept of the ventilation to install an extra fan over there, and they have to compromise with them. And even at the evening time, usually we have seen that the male population of these low income settlements are supposed to sit somewhere in an open cafe, the tea stall, and somewhere. But the female population are supposed to get inside, or even in some of the settlements, they are not allowed to uh, go on the rooftop if they had that's available, because they consider that, oh, that's not safe, that's against our social norms. So the gendered policy in terms of heat impact on specifically on the women population is really need of the time for the Pakistan, and specifically for the cities like Karachi, Lahore, and Peshawar, and others. Yeah.
If I can just maybe quickly add from some things that we're kind of thinking through in Colombo in response to this, is that I think in terms of a research gap, we really do see a gap in terms of also what are the indirect impacts. So even things like economic impact, I think it's easier to talk about things like health impact, impact on produce and how people cope. But there are all these other kind of variables that we don't really have enough information on. Also, in particular, about how heat impacts households and the kind of work that they do and how it adds to the time poverty. And from sort of the various literature that we see from other parts of other cities, we can see that even things like, on hotter days, people tend to change clothes a lot more because they sweat a lot. which then adds to the burden that women have to bear in terms of, laundry and washing, again, adding to their time poverty. So, those may not always be connections that we directly make. And it's the same for women that we talk to also, where like that they don't always make the connections between things like heat stress and their own time poverty. So how, thinking methodologically also about how to kind of approach these gaps for us, I think would be quite crucial. And just to end, I think also one big gap they would like to kind of address is around cooling. And what are sort of the solutions for cooling that don't require, again, a lot of labor, particularly women's to go into, not a lot of money. Like, what are the most sustainable ways in which communities can think about cooling without also kind of us saying the state needs to do this, the municipality needs to do this, the private sector needs to do this. So, thinking of things like even cooling from like a household level to, moving up also. So yeah, that's just kind of what I wanted to add to that question.
Yeah, just building a bit on that, I think that there's a need to see like the layered impacts of heat. So even when we're looking at outdoor workers, thinking about the built environment they're coming from, even kind of juxtaposing different types of data, like for instance, Mohammed is talking about the increase of hot nights, which is something we have also seen in Colombo. So what does it mean for somebody who is working outdoors anyway in a hot environment to have not slept properly because he or she has had a hot night? And I think this is also where the kind of interdisciplinary nature of heat really needs to kind of come in, because even it is so tied up in the energy landscape as well. So thinking about the impacts of tariff hikes, we've already seen on our work to do with energy justice that, again, women in particular are foregoing fans, foregoing kind of thermal cooling to save money off electricity. So I think we can't take even cooling strategies as something that is free from the wider economic conditions and structural conditions that we are in.
Thank you, everyone. I think someone in the chat also agrees with Mohammed's comment in terms of seeing the impact of heat in kitchens in informal settlements. So that has been brought up. But if there are any other questions in the chat that anyone has as well, please feel free to send them through to us. I do have a question that is a bit more specific, especially to Muhammad. Given what you've seen and what you know about Colombo and your experiences in working around heat in Pakistan, what do you think that we in Colombo can learn from Karachi, and what can we learn, and what can we possibly do to mitigate heat levels in Colombo reaching the levels that they have in Pakistan right now?
Sorry, if I can just add, I think just a connection that I'm making also is that Karachi is also a coastal city. And so is Colombo, so is Jaffna. So in that sense, I think if you could maybe think a little, respond more also about the coastal cities, that I think would be quite helpful for like us and also Amita to also kind of learn from.
Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned that we experienced one of the deadly heat wave in 2015, and after that in 2017, the government or specifically the local government established one of the heat wave management plan. But sadly, that plan was not accordingly as one of the coastal city, as you mentioned that, and that's a copy of Ahmedabad heat wave master plan, and a very little information that comes up from the ground situation that we are facing in Karachi. So as you mentioned that the two of the infrastructure, those are really connected when we talk about the heat. One is energy, the second is water, and those also have the gender impact as well, as we consider that the 65% of the female population are supposed to live inside the home. Those are not really ventilated, and the water and the female have a strong relation in terms of their daily chores. So it's really surprising for us as well. One of the meeting called by the board of directors, the agency that responsible to provide water, and all of the members are men's, and not a single women representation in the board. So that was really surprising and sad for us in a way that on the daily chores on at the home level, the female population are facing the water crisis directly, and even as you mentioned that the sleeping pattern for the labor class in the low income group. Can you imagine that in Karachi, almost 14 to 16 hours of the load shedding in a day, most of the informal settlement are facing, and you can imagine that what would be the sleeping pattern with the higher temperature to the labor class, those supposed to comes up to their job on the very next day. So these are the challenges that we are facing on the regular basis specifically. So if we are trying to fix these two infrastructure, the availability of water and the electricity. So in terms of Sri Lanka, you people have to focus these two infrastructure very first, because it's come up with the labor class, it's come up with the gender segregation, the older people. The third is the health. So if whatever the disease or the casualties, those come up within the domain of the heat, if they report it in an accurate way, so by that we can plan for the future. Likewise, in Pakistan, we cannot make a good health plan. We cannot make a good heat mitigation plan, because we don't have these three kind of data set from the ground, from the communities, because uh, whatever that projected or showcased by the government agencies is really different in the report, and from the ground situation is entirely different. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Muhammad. We've gotten a few questions on the chat. Mendini has asked, curious to know if there is any work done on heat stress for kids, and has this directly / indirectly affected women / caregivers?
I think
Maybe to sorry, go ahead, Meghal.
no, just this is again coming from the interviews, but I think the certain diseases kind of get worse. These childhood diseases also get worse with heat. I think we had one interviewee that said that a child had a foot and mouth disease, some kind of disease that was getting worse due to heat. We consistently, I think, see women and caregivers foregoing thermal comfort to ensure that their child has thermal comfort and sacrificing their comfort for children. So, for example, even sometimes spending ridiculous amounts of money on even air conditioning to ensure that the child can study in peace or be, sleep in peace while the mother is not even using a fan. So I think that these kind of, anyway, because the burden of caregiving, as Amita has also pointed out, falls so much on women. I think that any kind of attempt will also indirectly affect women.
And I guess just to add, and this comes back to that point of kind of a multi-sectoral response, is that on days of extreme heat, schools also tend to close, and suddenly the closure is announced. And usually this means that women who can't manage to find some care for their kids who are then going to be at home will have to forego a day's work, or don't have any kind of other alternative means, that then directly not only their time but their also income earning abilities, it's harder to adjust when things like sudden school closures happen. And if you look at some of the reporting over time, you can also see that schools in Sri Lanka have also not changed their calendars according to periods of extreme heat. So you still have schools having sports practices during the day, kids fainting. I think recently also we saw where a child had died from heat stress during a sports meet. So I think this is why we need a multi-sectoral approach to this, so that they're not reactive and they're not ad hoc, because they do tend to have spillover effects on other areas. But also be like kind of curious to hear from Amita as well about how women manage sort of kids and care work, because what we see in Colombo is that it's harder to adjust, but a lot of them then tend to do more domestic work or more informal work. So there is a real correlation between how women and adjust care and care duties and the kind of work they opt to do. And my fear is also that these kinds of options may tend to do more irregular work if they can't also adjust to sudden school closures, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely what, at least from my observations, to the women, with the women I've spoken to, seems to be happening almost every time someone in the family, whether it's a child or an elderly member of the family, or even, a spouse, falls ill due to some kind of heat-related illness. It is often the woman who is taking care of that family member. But just to go back to the question on whether children are more likely to be impacted, the Ministry of Health official that I spoke to mentioned that there were significant differences in the kind of physiological impact. So pregnant women, children under the age of 1, the elderly were much more likely to kind of experience or to kind of, and also people with existing diseases, I should mention as well. So non-communicable diseases such as diabetes and chronic kidney disease. These kinds of individuals were more vulnerable to extreme heat, for sure. And just to add one more point, there it's, I mentioned earlier when I was talking about how, female labor force participation is impacted by extreme heat. And one of, a couple of studies have actually showed that when women are engaged in paid employment, so not just the invisible unpaid work that they're doing at home and in terms of caretaking for their family members, but when they're engaged in paid employment, there's a significant difference between the amount of income that is then reinvested into children. So when Sri Lanka already has this massive gap in labor force participation, and when heat exacerbates these gaps and takes women out of certain industries, you're going to have less reinvestment into children and into, the women who are engaging in paid employment. They often use that income, if they have children, to pay for, things needed for school or, for the professional kind of development of their children as well. And so that's another way that children can be impacted by extreme heat.
Thanks, Amita. Muhammad, do you have anything to add in to what's been said so far?
Yeah, so there is no specific study or work done that tell us about the heat stress on the kid. But some of the organization, those worked on education and the school and out of school children, and they work in a way that how many children are getting comfort at the time of schools, and how many children are not getting comfort in a way that school don't have a fan and don't have the electricity alternative like generators and others, but not specifically that during the whole time period, including the school time as well as the time a child or kid supposed to spend at home. There is no specific study on it here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Muhammad. I think we have 2 more questions that are a bit more specific to the Colombo Urban Lab team. The first is, any opinions on the relationship between unequal urban green distribution and heat stresses in Colombo, Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think that it's quite, I think even we've done work on a survey of Colombo's settlements that also shows that there's a real shortage of green space and recreational space for Colombo's working class poor. And I think that you see that in North Colombo, there's really a shortage of green space compared to maybe South Colombo. And this is again reflected in the literature. So there's quite a lot of literature that has documented that temperatures are much higher in North Colombo and in the areas like Kochikade and per day, compared to, say, Cinnamon Gardens being the coolest place in Colombo. A lot of studies have shown, which is not very surprising considering that this big park, Vihara Mahadevi Park, takes up a lot of space there. There's also quite a cooling effect that comes from parks by the ocean. So Golf Face, for example, is also not as hot as North Colombo because of the cooling effect of the sea. And I think that this was also reflected in what our respondents said, especially when people who are households also talk about the lack of green space and the fact that this is not a cool environment, that the materiality of the houses also means that it is quite hot. So I think that it is a significant problem, and it has been identified to increase heat stress.
Another question we have is if we manage to review the current Sri Lankan government schemes that can be used to fund a heat action plan.
So I think, I mean, a very brief answer here. We actually don't have like systemic proper heat action plans, not in the way that you see in like other cities in India. We've also have any kind of proper systematic heat action plans that we see in Sri Lanka. I mean, and we've seen a lot of other cities like Karachi and cities in India that really do kind of mainstream different areas like gender, like livelihood. So that would definitely be something that that the government, the state, and development partners need to think about. Whatever that we've seen so far in Sri Lanka is also quite isolated. It looks at it only from like a climate perspective, but not so much about how it impacts different types of people and different sectors. So a very brief answer to that question.
Thanks, Iromi. We also have a question about if there are any solutions that can be directly imported into Sri Lanka, especially for outdoor workers based on the work that has been done in Karachi. Muhammad, do you have any insights on that based on what we've seen so far?
Yeah, thank you. As I mentioned that we are working on these three infrastructure, the energy, water, as well as the health. If you add up the greenery in it to have the more greenery, so by these four, we can work out for any of the city because the urbanization is everywhere and cities are come up with the urbanization and to adding the concrete. But here in Pakistan, we are trying to make a solution in a way that the climate pro materials to come up with the buildings and the built up because without that we cannot combat the heat impact. We cannot neutralize the impact as Iromi and some other one mentioned that the energy prices are getting higher and the people cannot afford the air conditioning at all. Even in Karachi, most of the families are just on their air condition just 3 hours for the night and the 2 hours at the daytime because otherwise their energy bills in a way that 50% of their income or the 30% of their income. So these three fours infrastructure by that Karachi and Sri Lanka as well comes up with a good way. And I don't know about the labor laws of Sri Lanka, but we are trying to make some amendment and change in the labor laws for the outdoor worker because it's really important. The labor workforce, those supposed to directly expose the sun, cannot work 8 hours or 9 hours in a day when the temperature is higher or the heat wave alert is there. So at least the days when the heat wave alert or the early warning is there, their working time is to be shrink up to the 5 hours. Likewise, they can start the work at the 7 a.m. and up to the 1 p.m. they can work easily, and after that it's really difficult to work for them. So these are the few things that those could be replicate in Sri Lanka as well. But it could be come up when at least one of the document established on the name of the heat action plan, because they definitely talk about a little bit from the ground situation, some policies, those talk about these infrastructure, those are aligned with the heat wave and the impact of heat here. Thank you.
Um, thank you so much. I think just to respond to that, completely agree about kind of strengthening social protection systems in Sri Lanka and labor laws. One key area that we do need to focus on, because I think, like we have kind of reiterated, if people don't go to work, they don't make an income. And there's no, annual leave, sick leave. So irrespective of the weather, people still need to go to work. And that is kind of, and they don't, particularly outdoor workers and informal workers don't currently under Sri Lankan labor laws don't have any of those safeguards that formal workers do. And in terms of social protection, also, it's really lacking in that area, looking at kind of climate impacts and how we can strengthen social protection. And maybe I'll just hand over to Amita for concluding remarks, and I think we can wrap up. And thanks again to everyone who has stayed on so far.
I guess, thanks, Iromi. I was just going to add that, what I've seen from the workers in the Sultans and also cashew nut processing is that they really benefit from flexible working hours, and that's something we can definitely have more clearly in our law. I think there were some proposals for flexible work hours to be to amend our labor laws, but I'm not sure if they've been implemented. And that again, allows women to take adaptation into their own hands and avoid like extreme heat at the hottest times of the day. Again, to kind of reiterate that we really need not just the state, but also employers to be more proactive about managing extreme heat. So, anything from like providing their staff with first aid training and the ability to recognize when there are like symptoms of heat-related illnesses, or providing toilet facilities, drinking water, protective gear, and encouraging their employees to use to hydrate, not to use a bathroom, to avoid dehydrating drinks. All of this is really important. So employers need to step up and educate people they're working with, and the state also can do certain things to make our labor law more kind of accommodative of women and men working under extreme heat. But yeah, just as a concluding remark, I think we've all talked a lot about climate adaptation. And at the end of the day, it's so nice to have people from other South Asian regions also here. At the end of the day, South Asia is it's so vulnerable to climate shocks, and climate-related diplomacy is so essential because we can adapt and adapt and adapt, but we also need to kind of address the problem at its root, and that requires maybe regional approaches as well.
Thank you so much, Amita, and I think that is a great note to end our discussion today. Thank you to Amita and Muhammad for joining us today and sharing your insights based on the research that you've done regionally. We're really appreciative of your time. And thank you to everyone who stuck around, even though we went quite a bit above the time that we were planning to discuss. And thank you for sticking around for the Q&A as well. Please continue to engage with the work that Colombo Urban Lab and Center for a Smart Future is doing through our social media. And please feel free to reach out to any of us through our emails if you have any further questions regarding the report or anything else that you would like to engage with us about. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll wrap up for today, and have a good night or have a good day from wherever you're joining. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.